Great, we're on quest 31. It's basically just from the end of July going into August, funny enough. We don't normally go away in this sort of what I call high season, but high season really isn't high season right now because of the old infamous coronavirus, the COVID-19. So quest 31 is about Arthur's Table, that's what we've called it, because it's all about the filming and the trek and the trace of the King Arthur, Lancelot across different parts of the lands, and how the Nevilles, the Clarks and the Fordhams, in particular those three surnames, tied themselves into the quest for the Grail. So there's a bit of Templar insight there as well, although we try not to focus too much on the Templarism these days, because in the scheme of life, the universe and everything, Templarism is a fairly new concept, I guess. You know, we go back to the 1100s, that's fairly new. But what we want to do is go back before the 1100s. So that's quite interesting. So we started off, we drove from Cambridge obviously, and we started off driving through to Cirencester, which took me a little bit of time to get used to that little name for a minute. I think I would have preferred Cirencester to be called Corinium from the Roman times. Now it's quite interesting, the feel of Cirencester has exactly the same feel as we had on a previous shoot that we did over in Alton in France. The difference being is there's much more exposure to the Roman side in France. That's not a bad thing, not a good thing, just an observation. The Amphitheatre here, which I'll talk about shortly, is interesting as well. So we went first of all to the Church of St John the Baptist, and we were looking where Lord Edward Neville, my 13th great grandfather, who was born in 1471 in Abergavenny in Wales, so where he found his heart in John, when he obviously spent a bit of time, which we know in history, at the church for various reasons and meetings and being in the area, I guess on business and what have you. So that was quite interesting for me. I think also it's interesting to know that there is a Catherine chapel there in the Church of St John the Baptist, and it's all based around Catherine of Alexandria, which as we know is from Egypt, from the year 287 AD through to 305 AD. So it's quite interesting that there's a chapel dedicated in Cirencester of somebody all the way from Egypt, which I suppose isn't unheard of when we look at saints and patrons and things along the way. So, I mean, the church itself was built, well, it started its construction around about 1115 AD. But like most places we go to, they're built on top of other buildings along the way. So that's always quite an interesting part. Sadly, we couldn't get into there, so what else could we say apart from what we know from our own records, really? So that's that one. Going on, we went straight on without any hesitation to this amphitheatre. It's quite surreal because it's actually built in almost like a housing estate area, built up area, or should I say, the houses are built up around the amphitheatre. The difference being from the Cirencester amphitheatre and the Alton one in France is that there wasn't much exposure of steps and things going down. Now whether they've been eroded, which I don't believe, I believe it hasn't probably been exposed as much as it has been in France. So you could get the sense of it, but you could get the feel of it, but I think there could be a lot more excavation work done to expose those stones and steps and to give people a really good perspective about what it would have looked like back then. So as we know, Cirencester was Corinium Dubinorum. What a name! What a name! I think Corinium would have been nice enough, as I say. But you know, we have to change things all the time, don't we? What's interesting in the amphitheatre, it had wooden seats, but it still would have had brickwork and steps going down. It housed around about 8,000 people at any one time, which is a lot for this area, I guess, if you could look back at the sort of reduction in time of population growth in the area compared to Alton. So it's only about a quarter of the size. But what's interesting is it's actually aligned in parallel to the streets of the town itself. Now with Cirencester, that's very much tied into my 9th great grandfather, who's James Fordham, so from the Fordham line. Now he was actually born in 1697 in Ware in Hertfordshire, as Hertfordshire as it is today, and he understood the Roman connection. Now James, from my understanding of the family lines and the threads, is he had a great passion for the Roman history. So that would explain why he spent quite a bit of time in Cirencester itself along the way. So that was that one. We then went on, so that sort of concluded day one really. Into day two, the Saturday, we went on to Bath, the place of Bath, which is a really vibrant, a really lively place. In fact, it felt like I was in Cambridge, to be fair. It really had that sort of sense of feel about it. Whether that's because of a university or the type of things that go on there, I don't know. But it certainly felt like a counterpart to Cambridge. Some people might like that or hate that for me saying that. However, we went to the Roman baths. Now, again, normally this season, as I was advised by one of the curators, is that you'd normally be like sardines in a tin, you'd be crammed. But because of the social distancing, rightly or wrongly, we had to sort of pace ourselves going round. And there was a lot more space and time for us to look at different artefacts and things in there. I mean, what's interesting is we've got to, before I talk about the sort of hard facts, let's just contemplate for 1 millisecond on the fact of this hot spring. So where's this hot spring coming from? Yeah. What we fail to recognise and appreciate in England is that we have a vast amount of fault lines, yeah, which over the millennia would have had earthquakes, would have had volcanic action. So, you know, the hot springs doesn't come from nowhere, it comes from some kind of deep underground activity that creates the heat through magma, that creates and warms the water, that brings it through the sediments of the rock and through in to create a warm, hot, natural spring. Like a geyser almost, I guess, in that sense. So I think we should always be mindful that England has fault lines, first of all. England had volcanoes in the past, extinct or not. And I think as the Earth is changing radically right now, over the time, much faster than anyone's actually really appreciated or even thought it would do, I think what we need to do is really concentrate and focus on these fault lines across the lands and say, is it really safe to build there? Is it really safe to be putting populations in those particular pockets of areas where the fault lines cross? And, you know, what sort of impact will that have as as we know, without sounding too sort of Extinction Rebellion? They don't get my vote, by the way, but not without sounding too much like an Extinction Rebellion fanatic. What do we do? You know, do we carry on abusing the planet until it's no more? Do we carry on abusing it so the temperature keeps on rising? What's going to happen to these fault lines? Are they going to reawaken? Is the granite beneath our feet going to start to dissolve and sink to the very midst of time? Who knows? Who knows? But I think they're important to think about. So the temple itself, the Roman baths, going back to the four, built between 60 and 70 CE. Now for the first few decades in Roman Britain, quite interesting. I think this is another thing to talk about the Romans. We always talk about that, rightly or wrongly. I'm not condoning it, I don't accept it, but I think there has to be an element of the Roman Empire itself had a very large sense of homosexuality. And for some reason, over the time, we've suddenly changed our ethos on the world, and we sort of said, you know, and over the, oh yes, okay, it's coming back around full circle again, but homosexuality is suddenly accepted again. But for many, many, many decades, we've persecuted same-sex relations, and it's only in the last sort of 10 years, 1 decade, that suddenly things are starting to have a turnaround again. Well, hey, no surprise, Sherlock, the Romans were doing this back in 70 AD. You know, they were having same-sex relations and no one batted an eyelid. So I think it's, again, we need to sort of think about how we view the world today. We are so insignificant in this world. We all are, me included. Your lifetime on this earth is an average of 78 to 80 years. You're born, you die, you're forgotten. Yeah, inevitably, you will be forgotten about. So I think the only thing you can do is appreciate what you have at the time, and perhaps don't be so judgmental on others. That's the most important thing. I think the message I'd like to get across is that, you know, we're all very guilty of that. We are very judgmental towards other people, what they do, what they don't do, what they like, what they don't like. The fact of the matter is, whatever your age today, 100 years from now, it won't matter what you thought, because you won't be here. That's the reality. So just enjoy it, relax, and go with the flow, really, I think. That's the main thing. So sacred springs. We talked about sacred springs. We know it's a place of worship of the Celts. the Celtic lands, which makes much sense. You can see that, you can feel that in all the areas and environments about how Celtic this area was, which is really important. Connected to my 14th great-grandfather, Baron George Neville, again no surprise, born 1440 Abergavenny. It was a place where secret meetings were held. Now that's interesting, because that's actually with King Henry VI. Now we know that in relation to history or certain writings, that the year 1459 was quite particular for Bath, for some very interesting times. So I'll leave you to research that at your own leisure and pleasure. So, and I'd just like to say the last thing about the spring part is that we know the fault line, I've talked about faults already, we need to really start focusing. These fault lines of this England, the Wales, Scotland, Cornwall, all those areas, we really need to be giving this more focus, because we're being so blasé about it and so complacent about these things, and yet the world's about to have a big upheaval, and we need to think about, hang on, what's going to happen to the lands where we live, where we work, where we raise our children. The spring is on what's known as the Penicuik Fault. So if you ever want to research that, it's the Penicuik Fault, and it is from a geological fault which we've already mentioned. So, you know, I think that's what we need to. It's nice to see the springs. People say, oh, it's lovely and hot, but do they really go that one step beyond, that one step further to say, why is the water hot? Why is it steaming? You know, it's not it's by natural resource, not by interactive resource, really, not by made up stuff, really. We wanted to go after that, after the springs and that, just go to Bath Abbey. Now that, I particularly that, again, it's Baron George Neville, 1440 Abergavenny, my 14th great-grandfather, and again it ties into the secret, so to enhance the Jacob's Ladder. Now that's the only part of cryptic clue that I can give in the video. It's with a king, so to enhance Jacob's Ladder. Now we know that on the outside front elevation of the Abbey on the right hand side, we've got Jacob's Ladder going up. There's a big significance, and I think there's a lot of things that, yes, you can look into things too much, but there are certain, all churches are, abbeys, cathedrals, churches, they're libraries. We need to remember that. They are libraries. Yes, they are places where people can go and worship their deity, and they can you know, feel safe and secure, one would hope, providing God's open that day, of course. That always is a bone of contention with me. You know, every church should have its doors open 24 hours a day. If you have to put CCTV in recording, albeit well and good, do that. But on God's green earth, the buildings are meant to be there to serve the people. They were meant to be there to enhance the area and to provide sanctuary, to provide refuge for people in need. And what do we find? We find gates closed, we find bolts on things, and we see iron girdles closed. Not exactly the idea that Jesus would have had in mind, is it really? However, moving swiftly on. The Abbey itself was founded in the 7th century. It's a Benedictine community that was dissolved in 1539 during the dissolution of the monasteries, which we know about all the issues of those. It's an interesting abbey. It's got a few interesting artefacts in there, but again, sadly, the queue today was horrendous. So it would have took way too long to go in there. But I think the only thing I'd like to mention about the Abbey itself, forget all the here and now, forget all the modern time stuff, we need to really focus on the year 675 AD. Yeah, when we had the king, at that particular time, was granted to the abbess 100 hides for Bath in the establishment, but it was Osric, the king, a guy called Osric. And I think that's important, if you get a chance, to just do a quick bit of research on him, because that's quite interesting. We know that there's been lots of power struggles in Bath over the years. We know between the sons of William the Conqueror following his death in 1087. Bath has always been a focus of conflict, I guess, but yet it still is very vibrant. It still seems to hold that there. But I say, this is in past history. But a fascinating place. People are really friendly, really liked it, very energetic, very nice. The part I'd like to just quickly go on to briefly, without is St Thomas Becket Church, which is in Widcombe, a district of Widcombe in Bath, in Somerset. Now that's connected to Baron Edward Neville, and what I also found there in the churchyard, which is interesting, or I say churchyard, in the actual memorial itself, is as a reference to one of the Clarks, W.H. Clark. So I'm going to give that some personal attention when I get back to Cambridgeshire in a couple of weeks' time, and give that my personal attention to see if I can clarify. I'm pretty certain that's one of my Clark lines, but I just need to be absolutely certain and clarify that on the ancestry trees. So, we say it's a secret to tell. The writings are hidden within the chard. It says the chard, and there's a reason for that. So, what a wonderful little church, tucked away from tourists, tucked away out. Almost a blink you'd miss it. You know, it's right tucked away. Sadly, the doors were closed to God again today, which was not very impressive. However, the church was built in 1490 by a chap called, it's designed by a chap called John Cantlow, who was the prior of Bath Abbey, and it took the place of an older Norman church. Again, we know that for facts. There has been a sacred piece of land for more than 2,000 years, beyond the Norman time. So, and we have this wonderful piece of land with all that wonderful library, the church itself, and then we suddenly find that it's closed. What are you doing, Vicar? Seriously, what are you doing? Yeah, we need to start thinking about these things. If Christianity is going to survive, it needs to change its ways. Yeah, if we're going to progress Christianity, then we need to think about how the churches respond to events, how they have their doors open 24/7, not 10 till 4, not 10 till 6 and close, 24/7. And what they're going to do is the good of the community. That's the only way the Christian church is going to survive. It needs to uptake itself. It needs to uplift. It's back in the dark ages. Yeah? It needs to come into modern times and try and evolve, if it can. It will do one of two things. Mark my words. The churches of Christianity, whatever denomination of Christianity you are, will either survive by evolution and by allowing change to be dynamic, or they will collapse, and other religions from other parts of the world will come into England and be the supreme religion. So there's a choice to be made, and that's everybody's choice. But most importantly, that's a choice of dioceses around the area, around the provinces, to decide what they want to do. So there we are. What can you say to that? Nothing. It's always a choice. Moving on from there, we left Bath happily, and we went on to the Avebury Stone Circles. What a lovely place! Big area, amazing place. What we've got there is it's modelled to be the stones of time. That's all I can really say on the video. Really, it was there's thought that it was created around about 3000 BC. I would put it more at 5000, probably 5000 BC. But, you know, some people will probably debate that. But hey, how do we know? None of us were around at that time. So we can only speculate and try and claw away at different types of excavations to try and make some kind of assumption, which is what it is, an assumption, an opinion, of a so-called professor that says it was built in this time. So, wonderful stone circles, great energy. I think it's somewhere between 3rd and 5th millennia BC. Original purpose, it says, most of the records say it's unknown. I'm going to put it to the people that the stone circles is more of a structure. If you look at the area there, you can see there's a moat going around that particular main area, which would have been a building. I'm going to put it to you that the actual stones there are parts of the original structures, the supporting poles, the panels that built the building around. If we look in the other areas adjacent to the main stone circle, as we call it, we will see that there are other structures there. And if we look at the landscape and we look from a bird's eye view, even if you go on Google and put it into satellite mode, you can see structures of buildings about how they were around. So it makes you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, it's how is it possible to say, oh, it's all pagan? I don't get that, because paganism wasn't around 5,000 millennia BC, was it? Paganism is quite a modern concept. So how can we say it's pagan? Has it been pagan for the last 1,000 years? I don't know. But it goes back beyond then. So when the powers that be built this great temple, which it would have been, and all the subsidiary buildings around, great temple, they weren't pagan. They weren't wearing little witches' robes with a little pentagram around them, were they? And saying how much they could feel the energy and how wonderful it is. They had a totally different purpose. So I think it's nice to put things into context. But a wonderful place. Now, Sir John Fordham, my 18th great-grandfather, he spent a lot of time in this area researching, which is quite good, again, a fascinating subject for him. He was born in 1423 in Kelshall, which was the Fordham main hold at that point in time. In fact, my family even paid for most of the Kelshall church to be built. And if you ever go to Kelshall Church in Hertfordshire, you'll see the wonderful big monument dedicated to my family, the Fordham line, with the statue, and it sort of emanates and shines down the sort of grassed pathway in the churchyard there, which is quite interesting. So I think, yeah, it's nice. I mean, we look at all these stone circles. We haven't put Stonehenge on. I mean, really, why would I want to put Stonehenge on a quest for the Grail? Has nothing to do with the quest for the Grail. In fact, if anyone knows their history properly, there are certain stones that have been raised and repaired that are not in their original position. So why would you think it's all about wonderful energy and stuff? Bizarre, really. But again, that's assumption for you, isn't it? Assumption can be quite dangerous, really. It makes when we assume something. I remember my school teachers, those eons ago, not that many eons ago, saying, when you assume something, you make an arse of you and an arse of me. Yeah? And that's how you learn to assume. So, many a true word spoken jest. But we're there so far, so that's good. We've gone that far, so we're getting there. We're now heading down tomorrow to Bristol. I'll say down, we're going to cross sort of southwest, southwest side, I guess, to Bristol. We're going to Bristol Cathedral, if we can get in. Let's hope God is open tomorrow, especially on its Sabbath day, or so they tell you it's the Sabbath day of Sunday. And then we're going to be going on to the most fascinating place, which is the Nine Stone Circle at Belstone. And then we'll be staying in a lovely place on the quayside, which will be quite pleasant for a few nights, whilst we explore the area beyond. So far Quest 31's going well, going according to plan. Shame those little doors are closed. So representatives of God, please open your doors, honestly. Let's get it real. Keep it real.